Hey guys, so this is going to be a video on how I approach coloring, and I already had audio entirely recorded for this video, which corrupted. So I am going to rewatch what I did and try to remember everything I did. Um, so obviously for starters, you either need a line art or a sketch. I'm just gonna color over the sketch I drew over the weekend. I am editing the contrast of said picture. And what I'm about to do should be getting a folder. Good, Katie. Alright, I'm going to put layers in that folder. I'm going to set the folder to multiply. Your first goal with coloring is to just worry about the base colors. You're not worried about environment lighting, you're not worried about anything, time of day, like whatever. I find it easiest just to pick the colors as you know them, like your character, whatever, and just worry about getting those down first because it's easier to change them all together by multiply and overlay layers than it is to try to in your head be like, okay, if their skin's this color and I'm adding like blue, but then there's like a orange, blah blah blah. You don't need to worry about that. Just get the colors down, and it'll also make sure like everything looks right. Um, I also at this point would recommend keeping everything on their own layers because it will make it much easier for you to edit the colors as you need to. I usually keep skin on one layer, hair on another, clothes on another, and then any details like eyes or any ornaments like designs on the clothes. You can really add as many layers as you want. There's no right or wrong answer to that. The layers simply exist to make it easy for you to change the color of things later. Um, so yeah. For this piece, I ended up going with mainly warm tones, earthy tones, because she's kind of like a druid-esque figure. So once again, a lot of picking colors for pieces. You want to try to pick themes of colors that resonate with what the subject matter is. This is going to end up being a pretty light and glowy sort of ethereal druid. So I don't need super sad colors or dark colors or anything. I just want nature. I have colored most of this with a hard brush up to this point. However, I also recommend coloring larger sections or just whatever you want with an airbrush, actually. You will be coloring out of the lines, but it kind of adds a nice ambient occlusion almost to the piece. Scattering color around is one of the ways to make the piece feel softer and more natural. So I'm fuzzing out the light she's holding, and you'll see I also have started to scatter the color orange around the picture as well, like behind her and opposite corners. And this is because it's important to not only balance your piece compositionally with like detail and where things are, but also with colors. You want to make sure if you've got a huge ball of glowing orange on one side, it's not the only piece of orange in the entire thing. I've given her some gold flowers in her hair, gold necklace, ambient sort of glow around her. And it'll just make things feel more intentional and balanced out. Now, you can shade on these layers if you want. I tend to do most of my shading after the fact, just through multiply layers, but there's no right or wrong way to do that either, honestly. What I do on this step though is add the blush and shading to skin, usually, by grabbing a like pinky orangish color and an airbrush. Just kind of going in like cheeks, nose, under the hair, tips of ears. Under the chin, you want to use a harder brush to make sure you get that line. If it's too pink, take it back into like the darker orange brown territory. So if you are coloring over a sketch and you need to color pick a color to use somewhere else, if you color pick over the sketch, it's going to be darker. So the way to color pick is to actually hide your sketch and then color pick there and then turn back on your sketch and keep coloring. Adding some detail to the branches. Okay, so here I am getting ready to move into the environment colors. I have my flats in a place where I'm pretty happy with them. And to start messing with environment, you're going to make a new layer on top of everything, set it to multiply, lower the opacity a bit, and just drag and drop a color in. I know for a fact I want this to be glowing, so I'm going to go for something a little darker. Blue is like a grayish blue, is usually pretty good for night. But you can do anything if you want it. I mean, really anything. You can have it more warm. Another good way is what I'm about to do is go to View and Hue and Saturation, and you can slide that hue bar around, and you might even like a color that you initially hadn't even thought of. And this you can use in a lot of different ways and is a really good way to sort of experiment with things and try things without needing to color pick everything and like manually pick stuff out. I end up going with something, like I said, it's a little on the green side actually, but it's dark. So now comes painting the light in, especially for a piece that's going to have a very strong light source, like this one. I find it easier to color with light, like to work from dark to light, than try to shade everywhere else. So ultimately what I'm going to do is grab an eraser brush and start erasing where I want light to be. Now, inside the eraser brush is pretty hard. I could make it an airbrush, but I was lazy. So right now I'm just scribbling with the eraser, trying to decide where I feel the light should be. And to smooth out these edges later, we're just going to go back in with a watercolor brush that is the same color as the layer and sort of blend the edges out a bit. But for now, let's just kind of go crazy. Try to think of your figure in a 3D space, where light would be, where it wouldn't be. And it looks a little jarring now, but as you blend out edges, it'll get better. I decided it was a little too dark. The contrast between my light edges and my dark was too intense for the piece and the mood I was going for. And here, so to get the right color, especially if you messed with the value slider a lot, you need to get that multiply layer back to normal at full opacity so you can color pick the right color. Then lower the opacity back down, set it back to multiply, and then you have a water brush or an airbrush or whatever with the right color to color on that multiply layer, and as you can see, it softens all of those edges really nicely. So at this point, you can keep adding multiply layers. I believe I go add one more multiply layer to sort of throw in some purple shadows. Yeah. It's still just using a mix of airbrushing, and the hard brush I'm using is still that marker tool, almost always. And this isn't to go too crazy, just to add some color variation and darken some stuff up. Now, this part comes the glow. After you have, you know, your environment the way you want and your colors or whatever, overlay is the next layer I use. It helps saturate things and builds a nice base to add glow, and also helps just keep scattering color around the scenes. A lot of the reason my pieces end up so soft and airy, I guess, is because I'm just constantly kind of airbrushing different colors around the piece. Usually for lights, I also took a lighter yellow and sort of airbrushed her face a bit to make it glow. And then to make it really glow, the Lumion shade layer is what you want. In Photoshop, it's the color dodge layer. In Sai, it's called Lumion shade. So make a new layer, set it to Lumi shade, drop it down to like 25%, grab a bright yellow or whatever color you want. And as you can see, like, that is really what makes a lot of the glow, especially in the pieces I work on. That's what's making them pop. So I'm going to add, you know, highlights. Before I've been using mostly the airbrush. For detail, I've gone back to the hard brush and I'm adding light on her clothing, on the edges of the branches. It eventually will go back in and add some highlighting behind her head. The eye will naturally be drawn to anywhere there's high contrast, which is why usually I throw pretty heavy backlighting behind my characters. One, I just really, really like the way it looks. And two, it's a good way to make sure your character stands out against the background. Even if you don't want to have just some ambiguous background light, like you could have like a cityscape or a sunset or just something, but and the colors I'm still trying to keep all in the same like warm ballpark. But the color behind her I will probably make blue because it's opposite orange, and real talk, like, blue and orange look fantastic together. There's a reason so many video game covers are blue and orange. Here I'm just trying to balance out the fact that the bottom feels a little empty, so I'm just gonna make it like smoke-esque. I don't actually even think those lines were part of that picture. They were for something else on the page, but it doesn't matter. Still using a lot of the water brush to smooth out lines. And here I'm going to go in and start messing with the backlighting. And it serves a purpose not only of making it easier to see her and draw attention to her face, especially because we have like the orb of 1,000 suns next to her, but it also cleans up the edges quite a bit too, like especially as you get closer to being done with color and move into the rendering phase, stuff like this will help. Yeah, I start using a glow layer that was too bright and end up with this more blue color. And as you can see, I'm still just using that marker tool, but marker tool for lining, and then I'm using the water brush to sort of lightly blend it out into the background. Gonna lightly do the same thing behind her. You want to try to keep a focus, like the lights, you want maybe a bit stronger in the direction that the light's actually coming. So airbrush out some over there. At this point, it's really whatever you think looks good. This could be a secondary light source or whatever. I started adding rim lighting to her back of her hair, but there's not really a strong light source back there, so I got rid of that and moved it more towards the front where the light actually is. And you can see it doesn't do a ton, but like it's enough to kind of help balance out the piece and focus and add some more color variation. Like I said, we have all really green, yellow, orange, earthy tones. So adding a splash of blue into that is just cool. That's also usually how I pick colors is I end up with a majority of the piece in one sort of color harmony ballpark and then an accent color that's like opposite to make it look cool. But that blue, I am still going to try to scatter around the piece for balance. Like I put it in the smoke for like magic-esque. You could add little blue lights floating around, maybe some blue fog or smoke or even some blue jewelry. I don't go too crazy coloring her clothes in this just because it was meant to be a sweet and to the point tutorial. But yeah, little details like that. And here I'm even still trying to balance out that orange light. Move that around. Yeah, as you near the end, a overlay layer on top of everything can be a good way to sort of finally unify everything, especially if you feel like some of your colors are off or you're having a hard time. I find dropping an orange overlay on everything is a really nice warm glow. I do a lot of warm pieces though. You can also do it in blue or whatever, and remember the hue slider is there. Like, you can make it any color you want. And at this point is about where I would merge everything together and start rendering. Um, which is basically just making new normal layers and going in and start actually painting out detail and stuff like that. Oh, so what I'm doing now is the secret to this, the true secret to making pictures very soft. Make a new layer, set it to like 25% opacity, get an airbrush, and color pick around the piece and just airbrush sections. Especially where light hits or where pieces are lighter, but feel free to like color pick like the dark of her hair and airbrush it out too. You're really airbrushing a lot. You're just kind of color picking around and fuzzing things out a bit. You can see the difference there. It doesn't need to be that intense. Like I said, I usually end up with mine around 25%, so dropping that down a bit. And it's not super noticeable if you don't know what you're looking for, but people do notice, and their comments usually, "How is your art so soft?" And that's pretty much it. You can get a similar effect by duplicating your final piece, setting the second layer to like Gaussian blur, and blurring that out and then lowering that layer's opacity, and you get kind of a very, very uniform uh, blur. But I prefer just to go in and color pick and do it by hand. You have a little more control over where the lighting is going and what you actually want where. And yeah, that's about it. That's how I approach every single piece I do, at least currently. So all that's left from here is just flattening it all and a lot of rendering. What I mean by rendering is just that like meticulous zoom in and paint, 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 paint. But yeah, I hope you found this useful and good luck.